All righty, Katie Griboski with Colorado MUFON is joining me right now. Katie, thank you so much for joining me. For people who don't know who you are, if you can briefly explain who you are and what you do.
I am actually the state director for Colorado for the MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. So every month we have meetings the second Saturday, and we do FI training and we collect data. And MUFON is actually, we took over Project Blue Book in 1969 and kind of took over their job. So it's really wonderful that, they just had this congressional hearing and they're actually going to get back in the game.
Yeah. And when you do approach these reports on UFOs that come in, your group approaches them with a scientific lens, correct?
Very much so. We have MUFON University, and we have to go through, the manual is like this thick. So there's a lot of training, a lot of testing, a lot of mentoring. And, 90% of the sightings that we get into MUFON, we are able to explain. But we're left with about that 10% margin that, we're left unexplained.
So this hearing, I was able to watch this hearing very intently, and I'm sure you were watching it too. What's your overall take with what happened in Congress this week?
Well, first of all, I think the really good thing that came out of this hearing was removing the stigma for our military men and women and our pilots to feel comfortable to report these anomalous things they're seeing flying in our skies, these UAPs. So to me, that is a wonderful thing, because in the past, people would lose their jobs if they reported seeing something they couldn't explain. So I think that's first and foremost a really wonderful thing that came out of it.
And they brought up the fact that they now have like 400 reports that they've cataloged because of that reduced stigma. And we also talked about the standardization of reporting that they actually were talking about during that hearing. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Right. They're all about collecting data and being really rigorous and looking at, our radar and different. Of course, those are behind closed doors because they don't want to give away our secret technology that we have, especially under our oceans, and that to track these fast movers that are seen. They have a system now. So let's say a Navy pilot does encounter something up there in the skies. He has a protocol now to follow, so they will, collect the data from the radar and other instruments that they have.
This hearing is the first hearing of its kind in 50 years, more than 50 years. And what I found remarkable was that you had the US government essentially coming forward, verbalizing that it doesn't know what some of these things are. And I think that's pretty remarkable given the public's perception that the government has this all-knowing technology out there. What's your take on that?
Right. They did have to mention a few times that possibly it could be China or Russia, but it could be a threat to our pilots out there. And I think they mentioned 11 near misses, so it's very important that they're collecting these reports. But yeah, I think it's about time that they're having this hearing and that they are on board.
I think what's interesting here too is that, this was a public hearing where they played some visuals, and it drove me nuts when they couldn't figure out how to pause on the right, frame to get that silver orb that they were talking about. I was like, come on, guys, you got to be more prepared. But anyway, going along on that, we talked about the 11 near misses. This was a very public hearing, but there's also a closed component to this hearing. You can only imagine what was discussed in there.
Right. And I think that's critical. Obviously, we have secrets that we don't want our adversaries to know what we have out there, what we can detect coming in. Right. So, and they're going to use those same instruments to track and research and gather data for these anomalous objects in the sky. So these are things that they do have to talk about behind closed doors. And I certainly understand that.
With this being discussed more in the mainstream press, and the UAP report that came out last summer, and then you have this very public hearing that happened this week, and the reporting happening in the New York Times, and you have these high profile politicians talking about how that the government needs to be more transparent with the American public. On your end, as a local on the ground UFO investigator, is your group seeing more reports coming in because of that lessened stigma?
We certainly are. Colorado has been very, very busy. We just received 2 new cases today, a case yesterday. And like I said, a lot of them we can explain away, Starlink, satellites, and whatnot, but we definitely have seen an uptick, and especially in Colorado. I thought it was also very interesting in the hearing, I think it was Gallagher, who was sort of the hero, in my opinion, of the hearing. He mentioned, the Battle of LA. Have we ever engaged, have the pilots ever engaged a UAP? And they said no, but the Battle of LA. And I'm actually sitting here in outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, in David Marler's archives, and he has one of the biggest, talk about history and data. This is a place to get it, and we were just discussing that. He has original Project Blue Book here, CUFOS, NICAP. There's so much history, and the history is being preserved. And actually, all of this then will go to the University of New Mexico. So it's important that that history is preserved. But some of the really huge encounters and sightings, they didn't even know about it. So I'm hoping that this is just the first step into, our congressmen and women to learn more about the phenomenon itself.
Where do you think things should go from here? As a UFO investigator, where would you like to see things go from here?
Well, a word that came up in the congressional hearing that concerned me a little bit was the word control. I think it's great that Congress and the DoD and other access projects and people are going to take this topic very seriously and gather data, but I don't want them to kick out the general public. And as a matter of fact, they kind of mentioned, like, can you prosecute or charge somebody, just an average citizen who has a sighting should still be able to report that sighting. And that's where MUFON comes in. And like I said, we take everybody's sightings very seriously, and we investigate them with protocols and standards, but everybody should have a part of this, not just a controlled government agency. So I'm hoping they don't lose sight of the public in all of this.
So in the end here, what do you think was kind of like, do you think there was a big surprise that came out of this hearing from your perspective?
Not really a surprise, no. I'm just happy that, this is a bipartisan topic. It should be. I'm happy that this, again, is one of hopefully many that we'll have in discussions. And now, like I said, people know how to report and what the protocol is to do that. So I'm happy about that. Yeah.
That's great. And Colorado MUFON is always willing to accept people's reports. How should someone go about doing that?
You can just go to MUFON.com, and there's, report a sighting. And we also have the ERT, which is an experiencer group with MUFON as well.
Great. That's all I have, Katie. Thank you so much for your time. Is there any other lasting thoughts you'd like to leave with me about this?
No, I think that's great. Yeah. I could go on and on and on, but for this purpose, we're all good.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy.